Okay, so I'm back and I just finished watching Paranormal Activity 2. Um, I like the first one better overall as far as the scary factor goes. This one was pretty good. This one's better as far as production values go because the cameras in this movie are HD. Um, it it makes me think that these movies are much better in the theater because of the way they try and scare you and the bangs and the loud noises. It just comes across as they're better theater movies. And there's not a lot of movies I'd say that for, but I think Paranormal Activity, when you're watching movies in this series, I think it's definitely better to see them in the theater. But this one came out in 2010, and the movie takes place in 2006, shortly before the events of the first movie. And in this one, we have a family, Christy, Dan. Um, Dan has a daughter from a previous marriage named Allie. They have a dog. They have a nanny named Martina. And they just had a new baby son named Hunter. So that's your cast of characters for this one. And it starts off Christy and Dan have their son, and they live in Carlsbad, California. Katie comes over to see the baby, and that's Katie from the first Paranormal Activity movie. She is Christy's sister. Well, she comes over to see the baby, and she's hanging out with him for a little bit, and then Dan and Katie, or Dan and Christy, I'm sorry, come back home, and they find that there's been a burglary in their home. Now, every room in the house is destroyed except for Hunter, the baby's room. And the only thing that they stole was a necklace that Katie had given to Christy. So Dan puts in all these security cameras. You got cameras to view every room of the house. They can view the pool outside, the baby's room, every room. And they're all in high definition. So the movie looks a lot better than the first one. And on night one, we just kind of see the cameras go around the house, and it's kind of giving you a feel of how this movie's going to go. The dog sleeps in the baby's room most of the time. In the morning, Christie's picking Hunter up, and his high chair gets tipped over. That's kind of the first paranormal stuff that happens. Martina, the nanny, she's wise to all this. She knows there's something going on. She makes these chants to herself, and when they ask her what she's doing, she says she's getting rid of the bad spirits, trying to keep the good spirits, that sort of thing. Night two, we see the baby. He's up in his crib. He's crying. Katie picks him up because I guess she's stayed with him for the weekend or whatever. And then we see Mika come by, and they flash across the screen that Mika was killed 60 days. Um, or yeah, Mika was killed 60 days before these events. And Dan starts to show Mika the cameras around the house and, talking about what happened. And Christy tells Katie about the robbery, and she says, I'm starting to feel these weird vibes. It reminds me of when we were kids. But Katie says, don't worry about it. Probably nothing, you just had a baby. So it's stress. And night three, we see Hunter. He's awake in his crib, and he's sitting up, and he looks like he's talking to someone. He's kind of playing around and joking, but it looks like he's talking to somebody invisible. And night four, we hear some noises, but it's nothing major. The dog is barking at a door. Night five, Martina is walking around the house, and she hears a bang, and she runs upstairs, and she sees the baby crying, and the dog is barking at something in the bathroom. She grabs the baby, and she starts walking around the house with this candle thing. She's doing chants, and this thing's burning and she's chanting and walking all over the house with it, like waving it back and forth, trying to get rid of the evil spirits. Dan and Christy get home and they see her doing this with their son and they get really mad at her. And then the next day we see her, she packs her bags and they basically fire her for this. So they come across as kind of kind of stupid here because we know that Martina is actually the only help they have right now, and things are just gonna get much worse. Um, the daughter Allie is kind of mad that they fire her. Hunter starts focusing more on weird stuff in his room, just seeing weird things that no one else can see. On night 8, Hunter is crying, and Christy goes in to check on him. And we see behind her the door slowly opening, and then we hear a bang. The next day, Dan finds a dead bird outside, and we hear these weird noises come through on the baby monitor. So that's one thing about these movies that's really good, is they slowly build the suspense up, and I think they do a really good job of that. You have the payoff at the end with, like in Paranormal Activity 1, where Katie goes crazy and throws Mika into the camera. Like the whole movie is just slowly building to this thing getting stronger and stronger, and then just going crazy and letting loose. And they do a really good job with the atmosphere in these movies and building you up into it. Paranormal Activity 2 kind of just jumps right into it. They still do a good job of building it up, but the creepy stuff starts almost immediately. So night 10, Christy hears one of the metal pots. They have in their kitchen. They have this thing above the counter, and it's has all these metal pots hanging on it, and you have to reach up and hook the things on. So she hears one of them fall, and she's like, "What the hell? How did this fall down?" So she goes down there and she puts it back up, and she's staring out the window, and all of a sudden it falls down again. So that was pretty good. Um, something they have a pool and there's a pool cleaner they use, and something keeps putting this thing on the side of the pool and taking it out. And each morning Dan goes out there and lifts it up and puts it back in the pool, and he doesn't think anything of this even though he has to do it every day. So Katie and Mika come over and then tells Katie, or he tells them that Christy thinks that there's a ghost in the house, and Katie and Christy kind of talk about how they saw ghosts as kids. Night 11, the stove catches on fire. Dan runs down and he grabs it. There's smoke all in the house and he throws it in the pool. He kind of blames it on Allie. Dan and Christy start to argue about what exactly is going on. She mentions the pots falling. He says, "Oh, you just hung them up wrong." She says, "Well, what about the pool cleaner? You keep having to put that in every morning." So they go and they look at the footage of him, and they see the pool cleaner kind of just magically lifts itself out of the pool. And he still can't believe it. He thinks there's something to this. And Allie is actually happy about the ghost. Well, they think it's a ghost. And she thinks maybe it's her mom. So she's actually kind of happy about this entire thing. Night 12, Hunter is playing again, and he's just playing with invisible people. The dog is growling and staring at something. The stuff with the dog is really well done. Dan has Allie and Christy come outside to look at something, and he makes the pool cleaner shoot out of the pool. So, I guess in his mind, that proved what happened, was explainable. It was not something paranormal. And he says Christy's been under a lot of stress, so he wants to take her out and, leave Allie home to watch the baby. Before they go, he goes outside and he gets in the pool, and then he gets in the hot tub, which is boiling hot. He thinks Allie set the temperature up, but she says that even if I did leave the heat on, it wouldn't be boiling hot. Him and Christy leave. Allie has her boyfriend come over. They're home alone with the baby, and they decide to play with the Ouija board. Nothing really comes of that. Then we see her asleep on the couch, and a shadow kind of creeps over her, and then we just see her wake up like she just had a bad nightmare. She goes to go upstairs and she sees the front door's been left open. So she closes it and she heads up the stairs, and then she hears a really loud bang on the door. She goes outside thinking it's her boyfriend, and the door closes behind her. It just slams shut. And she's locked out. The dog starts to freak out and he runs downstairs and he's scratching the door trying to find a way to let her in. And then we hear something walking slowly up the stairs, something that we can't see. And it goes in the hunter's room and it slowly pulls him out of the crib. This looked really creepy, but the baby slowly starts to move and then it's lifted out of the crib, and then we see the baby running through the house and it's laughing and playing around, and it eventually goes to the basement door. Hunter opens the door and he goes in, and then a few minutes later he leaves the basement and goes upstairs back to his room. Dan and Christy get home. Hunter's in his crib crying, the dog's barking, and they can't find Allie. She eventually gets back inside and she says she was locked out. She went outside because she heard someone calling her name. Dan is mad about the entire thing. He says, I'm sick of this haunted house story. I'm sick of you guys talking about ghosts or whatever it is. This has to stop now. And Christy is trying to tell Allie, she says, I'll talk to him in the morning. Just go try and get some sleep. And then Allie starts to carry around a portable camera of her own to document this stuff because she's getting really freaked out. She tells the camera she's been having nightmares about a guy standing at her bed watching her sleep. She starts to look some stuff up online with her boyfriend, and she reads that people will offer their firstborn son to the devil or demons in exchange for power and money and all that stuff. And apparently those people will be haunted until the debt is paid and they get the son. Then she watches footage of the door closing from the last night, and she shows it to Dan, but he still doesn't believe her. He says it's the wind or something like that. Night 17, Allie hears something and she goes downstairs to investigate. She sees like this small toy car moving on its own. And she shows the footage to Christy and tells her what Martina told her, that it's evil spirits in the house. Christy goes to see Katie from the first movie, and she starts to tell her what's going on, and Katie says, just leave it alone. You sound crazy, and the more you talk about it, the worse it'll get. So just quit talking about it and leave the whole thing alone, or else you're going to end up like Mom. So Christy, the next day, is drinking some coffee in the kitchen when all of a sudden all the cupboards and everything in the kitchen just swings open, and she freaks out. She runs away and she just starts screaming, leave me alone. This part was really awesome. Then she hears the tea kettle going off and she runs downstairs to shut it off, and she mans up and just puts everything back into the cupboards. Allie asks her, did something happen to you? And she says, we can't talk about this. Your Aunt Katie said if we talk about it, it won't go away, so everything is fine, nothing happened, we can't talk about this anymore. Allie finds out that Hunter was the first male son born on Christie's side of the family since the 1930s. So she's really starting to believe this theory that someone in their family line has sold the firstborn son to the devil. Night 19, the basement door opens, and we hear the dog barking. It runs downstairs, and all of a sudden, it's kind of barking at something, and we can see the dog, and then the dog just gets pulled behind the view of the camera, so we can't see what happens to the dog, but something attacks the dog. Dan and Allie run downstairs when they hear it yelping. Dan takes the dog to the vet with Allie, leaving Christy home alone. Christy is in the kitchen, and she goes to see Hunter, And when she enters her Hunter's room, something pulls her out of the room. It just grabs her by the legs and just starts dragging her, trying to pull her down the stairs. And she's holding on to the top stair, and her legs are just dangling in midair, like she's trying to fight this thing off. She finally breaks free, and she goes to run back into Hunter's room, and then it pulls her out again. This time it drags her all the way down the stairs and into the basement, and just slams the door. That part was pretty damn scary. And it looked great too. So she's trapped into the basement, and the door just eventually opens, and then we see Christy walk out, and she's calm. She's like possessed, kind of like Katie did in the first movie when she would just watch Mika sleeping. So Allie the next day is on the phone, and she's talking to someone, and she says, "I don't know, the dog just had a seizure. It's never happened before." And her dad, Dan, comes and says, "I gotta go, but I need you to watch Hunter. Something's wrong with Christy, so please watch him." She kind of fights with him and says, "Can I watch him at Brad's, her boyfriend?" Dan says no for some crazy reason. And so she's left there watching Hunter. Katie's lost her mind, or Christy's lost her mind. And Allie hears something upstairs, or not upstairs, she hears some like kind of scratching noises. And she opens the door to the basement. On the other side of the door are all these scratch marks, like something was trying to claw its way through the door. And she goes to Hunter's room, and the door's kind of halfway open, and we just see Katie's legs sitting in a chair in Hunter's room. And then Allie hears a noise, she turns her head, and then when she turns her head back to Hunter's room, Katie's gone. She's out of the chair. So this was a really good way to build suspense up to this part. I really like this. She calls her dad, and she says, "Something is really wrong with Christy. Please come back home now." So Allie tries to go back into Hunter's room, and Hunter's crying, and Christy just turns around and says, "Don't touch him." And she has kind of a deeper voice now because she's possessed. And Allie shows her dad the tape. He comes home, and she shows him the tape of Christy getting attacked and dragged down the stairs into the basement. And Dan he doesn't know what to believe. So the only thing he can think to do to help him is he calls Martina back. She comes over to the house, she does some chants and tries to do some magic for him. And she explains the situation. And what they have to do is they have to pass this demon on to someone else. It has to be a blood relative. So Dan, in order to save his wife and child, wants to pass the demon on to Katie. Allie says, "No, we can't do that. It's her sister." But Dan says, "We're going to do this, and then she's not going to have any memory of being possessed, and we're never going to mention this again." So he goes into Christy's room, and he has this crucifix. And he tries to touch her with it, and Christy attacks him. And then the camera gets knocked down, everything starts going crazy, furniture starts moving around. Christy takes Hunter and just runs. They start to use a night vision camera, which makes everything a lot scarier, in my opinion. And they take this night vision camera and they're going through the house trying to find Christy and Hunter. They eventually get to the basement. Dan tells Allie to stay here. He goes to the basement, and he eventually does find Hunter, and Christy attacks him again. And he kind of drops the camera, and during the struggle, we can't really see that much, but he places the crucifix on Christy, and then all we see is the floor just start to vibrate. It's just shaking up and down. You see all this dirt on the floor bouncing in midair. And then we see Hunter walking in front of the camera. Then we see Dan put Christy to bed. And then we see Dan take the picture of Katie from the first movie that they found in the attic, and he kind of burns it. So I guess that explains the picture. And then it says 3 weeks later, Katie is over at the house and she's asking Christy, is any of that weird stuff happening anymore? And Christy says, no, everything's fine now. And she has no memory of any of this stuff happening. And Katie says, that's weird because I'm having a lot of weird stuff happen to me. So you feel really bad for this poor girl that she got completely screwed over. And Christy tells her to take her own advice and not to talk about it or it'll make it worse. And then it shows the clips from the beginning of the first movie. And then the screen says that Mika was killed in October 2006. And then it cuts back to the security footage of Dan and Christy's house, and it says October 9th, 2006. And we see Dan sleeping on the couch. We see Christy upstairs with Hunter, who's crying. And then all of a sudden, Katie is in their house, covered in blood. She just killed Mika. She walks behind Dan, breaks his neck. She goes upstairs, and she just barges right into the room and throws Christy into the camera. She picks up Hunter. He's crying, and she just leaves the house. And then across the screen at the end of the movie, it says that Allie returned home from a school trip, found the bodies of Dan and Christy, and the whereabouts of Katie and Hunter are still unknown. So it was a decent movie. It had a lot more stuff than the first one. They had a lot more money to work with this time. They had better cameras. It didn't seem quite as suspenseful, but it was still a good movie, I thought. I liked it. And I've really found something I like in all three of the Paranormal Activity movies. I don't think they're bad, but the fact that I did hear that the fourth movie was announced, if they start putting them out every year like Saw, I mean, we saw what happened to the Saw franchise. I mean, it got bad. The last Saw movie was pretty bad. So if it goes the way of Saw, it could suck, but right now the movies are still pretty good and I like watching them, and I plan to see the fourth one in theaters too. So I hope you guys like this review. I'll be back tomorrow with Paranormal Activity 3. And subscribe to my channel, like the videos, leave some comments. If you have a request for a horror movie or any movie in general you'd like me to review, I'll be glad to do it. So send me some requests, and thanks for listening. Bye.